You've probably spent a significant portion of your life feeling like you're running a different operating system to everyone else. Not broken, not stupid, not lazy, just different in a way that nobody ever quite named for you. Maybe you've always needed more time to process things than other people. Maybe loud environments don't just annoy you, they physically overwhelm you. Maybe you hyperfocus on things you love for hours without noticing time pass and then can't start a simple task for 3 days straight. Maybe you've spent years masking, performing a version of yourself in public that exhausts you, while privately wondering why social interaction costs you so much more energy than it seems to cost everyone else. If any of that landed, this video is for you. Today, we're going through 12 key traits that show up consistently in autism, ADHD, and AuDHD, which is what it's called when both occur together. We're going to look at what each trait actually is, what the neuroscience behind it says, and crucially, where autism and ADHD overlap, where they differ, and what AuDHD looks like when both are operating in the same brain simultaneously. This is not a diagnostic tool, it's a map, and sometimes having a map for the first time changes everything. Let's start. Trait 1, sensory processing differences. Your nervous system is not processing the world the same way most people's do. For autistic people, sensory input, sound, light, texture, smell, taste, is often experienced at a heightened intensity. The tag in a shirt isn't mildly irritating, it's genuinely unbearable. The hum of a fluorescent light isn't background noise, it's a constant intrusion that consumes cognitive bandwidth. A crowded room isn't just busy, it's an assault of overlapping signals that the brain struggles to filter and prioritize. This happens because autistic brains process sensory information with less filtering. Most brains apply a kind of automatic dampening system. Background noise gets quieted, irrelevant stimuli get deprioritized. Autistic brains are less aggressive with that filtering. Everything comes through closer to full volume. ADHD presents differently. People with ADHD often seek sensory stimulation rather than being overwhelmed by it. Bouncing a leg, tapping a pen, needing background noise to focus. The ADHD nervous system underregulates dopamine, which means it's often seeking additional input to reach a baseline level of engagement. AuDHD, both conditions together, creates a specific paradox. You can simultaneously be overwhelmed by certain sensory inputs and actively seeking others. Overwhelmed by the sound of someone chewing nearby, but needing music playing to focus. Hypersensitive to light touch, but craving deep pressure. The nervous system isn't just heightened or seeking, it's doing both at once depending on the stimulus. Trait 2, executive function differences. Executive function is the brain's management system. It handles task initiation, planning, prioritization, time management, working memory, and impulse control. And in both autism and ADHD, for different neurological reasons, it works differently. In ADHD, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, is underactivated and underconnected to the rest of the brain's motivation and reward systems. This creates the defining ADHD experience, knowing exactly what you need to do, wanting to do it, and being completely unable to start. Not because of laziness, because the neurological bridge between intention and action isn't firing reliably. Task initiation is one of the most misunderstood executive function challenges. From the outside, it looks like procrastination or avoidance. From the inside, it feels like standing at the edge of a pool, fully intending to jump and your body simply refusing to move. In autism, executive function differences often show up differently, more in cognitive flexibility than in initiation. Switching tasks can be genuinely difficult. Transitioning between activities, especially unexpectedly, can cause real distress, not because the person is being rigid, but because the brain needs more time to shift its processing from one context to another. A UDHD combines both. You might have difficulty starting tasks and difficulty stopping them. hyper-focusing on something for 6 hours without being able to switch, then spending 3 days unable to begin the next thing. The executive function system isn't just dysregulated in one direction, it swings. Trait 3, hyperfocus and monotropism. This is one of the most misunderstood traits of both conditions, and it's also one of the most powerful. In ADHD, hyperfocus describes the ability to enter a state of intense, locked concentration on something that captures genuine interest, sometimes for hours or even days, to the exclusion of everything else: food, sleep, other obligations. It feels like the opposite of ADHD's focus problems, and in a way, it is. The same dopamine system that can't engage with a boring task floods with engagement when something is genuinely stimulating. In autism, a related concept is called monotropism, the tendency for the autistic brain to channel most of its attention and processing resources into a smaller number of intense interests at any given time. These interests aren't just hobbies, they're deep, consuming engagements with a specific topic, system, or domain. They can last years, they generate genuine expertise, and they provide something that general life often doesn't: a reliable source of regulation, meaning, and reward. The difference: ADHD hyperfocus tends to be more variable and interest driven, shifting across different topics over time. Autistic monotropism tends to be deeper and more sustained, fewer interests, but far more intense engagement with each one. A UDHD often produces a combination: deep monotropic interests that can also shift as ADHD novelty seeking kicks in, leaving the person feeling guilty about losing intensity on something that was once consuming. The interest didn't die. The dopamine system needed something new. Trait 4, rejection, sensitive dysphoria. This one is primarily associated with ADHD, but its effects ripple through every relationship, every career decision, and every interaction for the people who experience it. Rejection, sensitive dysphoria, RSD, is an intense emotional response to perceived rejection, criticism, or failure, not mild disappointment, not normal hurt feelings. A sudden, overwhelming wave of emotional pain that can feel completely disproportionate to the triggering event: a critical comment from a colleague, a friend who takes too long to reply, being left out of something. The emotional response can be immediate and flooding: shame, rage, devastation, and it can feel impossible to regulate. RSD is neurological, not characterological. It's driven by the same dopamine and norepinephrine dysregulation that underlies ADHD's attention and impulse control challenges. The emotional regulation system uses the same neurochemical infrastructure as the attention system. When that infrastructure is dysregulated, emotions, especially social pain, don't get the same buffering that most people's brains apply automatically. In autism, emotional dysregulation often has different roots: sensory overload, demand pressure, or masking fatigue, but the experience of intense, hard-to-regulate emotional responses is common to both. For AUDHD, RSD can be compounded by autistic experiences of social confusion. Not only does rejection hurt with extreme intensity, but the autistic brain may also have difficulty reading exactly what happened, whether it was real or what it means. The emotional pain arrives before the understanding catches up. Trait 5, masking and camouflaging. Masking is the process of suppressing, hiding, or compensating for neurodivergent traits in order to appear neurotypical, and it is exhausting in a way that is very difficult to describe to someone who doesn't do it. It means monitoring your body language consciously while trying to hold a conversation, scripting what you're going to say before social situations, suppressing stimming behaviors, the repetitive movements that regulate your nervous system, because they attract unwanted attention, performing eye contact that doesn't come naturally, laughing at the right moments, calibrating your volume and energy to what seems expected, all while simultaneously trying to actually participate in the interaction itself. Masking is more documented in autistic people, particularly autistic women and girls, whose diagnostic rates were historically much lower, partly because they masked more effectively and were therefore missed. But masking occurs across ADHD too, suppressing impulsivity, forcing stillness, pretending to follow a conversation your attention has already left. The cost of masking is real and measurable. Research links heavy masking to significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, burnout, and in autistic people specifically, to a phenomenon called autistic burnout, a state of complete physical and mental exhaustion that can last months or years, triggered by the sustained effort of performing neurotypicality. The cruel irony of masking is that it often works too well. People who mask effectively don't look like they're struggling, which means they often don't get support until the mask has completely broken down. Trait 6. Interoception differences. Interoception is the sense that tells you what's happening inside your own body. Hunger, thirst, temperature, tiredness, pain, the need to use the bathroom, emotional states before they become overwhelming. In both autism and ADHD, interoceptive awareness is frequently disrupted. This means you might not notice you're hungry until you're suddenly in a full blood sugar crash and can't function. You might not realize you're exhausted until you've completely hit a wall. You might not notice a building headache until it's a migraine. You might not recognize that what you're feeling is anxiety, only that something is wrong. This isn't just inconvenient. It affects health, relationships, and self-regulation in profound ways. Emotional dysregulation is often harder to manage when you can't detect the early signals. Meltdowns and shutdowns in autism are frequently preceded by a buildup of sensory and emotional load that the person wasn't fully tracking until it exceeded capacity. In ADHD, interoception differences often show up as time blindness, a closely related phenomenon where the sense of time passing internally is unreliable. You don't feel time moving. An hour feels like 10 minutes. A deadline that's 3 days away feels abstract and unreal until it's suddenly tomorrow. For AuDHD, both sets of interoceptive challenges coexist. Poor body awareness combined with time blindness creates a specific kind of daily chaos, not knowing how you feel, not knowing how long things take, and frequently being surprised by both. Trait 7. Social communication differences. This trait is probably the one most associated with autism in public understanding and the one most frequently mischaracterized. Autistic social communication differences are not a lack of interest in people. Most autistic people want connection deeply. The differences lie in how that connection is processed and expressed. Difficulty reading implicit social cues, the unspoken rules, the subtle facial expressions, the layered subtext of what people mean versus what they say, preference for direct, explicit communication. Difficulty with small talk not because it's boring, but because its rules are opaque and its purpose unclear. These differences are neurological, rooted in how the autistic brain processes social information, and crucially, they are bidirectional. Research shows that autistic people communicate effectively with other autistic people. The friction often arises specifically at the neurotypical autistic interface, two different social processing systems that weren't designed for each other. ADHD presents different social challenges. Impulsivity can mean interrupting, speaking before thinking, or saying something unfiltered that lands badly. Inattention can mean losing track of a conversation, seeming disinterested when you're not, or missing important social information because your attention drifted at the wrong moment. Emotional dysregulation through RSD can create patterns in relationships that are confusing to both parties. AuDHD can create a specific social experience where autistic communication differences and ADHD impulsivity and inattention overlap, making social interactions simultaneously deeply desired, frequently misread, and exhausting to sustain. Trait 8. Demand avoidance. Demand avoidance describes an intense resistance to demands, expectations, and perceived pressure. including demands that come from yourself. This is most associated with a profile called pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, which sits within the autistic spectrum. In PDA, the nervous system registers demands, any demand, even ones the person wants to comply with, as threats. The avoidance isn't defiance, it's a nervous system protection response that operates below conscious choice. This means that someone with a PDA profile might be desperately hungry but unable to eat because eating feels like complying with the demand their body is placing on them. They might want to go to an event they've been looking forward to, but find themselves unable to leave the house because the expectation itself creates resistance. A DHD also produces demand avoidance, though through a different mechanism. When tasks are externally imposed, they compete poorly with the ADHD brain's need for interest and autonomy-driven engagement. Demands that feel controlling or meaningless are especially difficult to engage with. The overlap in AuDHD can make demand avoidance particularly pronounced. The autistic nervous system threat response to demands combined with the ADHD preference for self-directed interest creates a profile where external structure can feel genuinely oppressive, even when the person logically wants to cooperate. Trait 9, emotional intensity. Both autism and ADHD are associated with emotions that arrive faster, hit harder, and take longer to recover from than most neurotypical people experience. This is not fragility, it is a neurological reality. In ADHD, the dopamine and norepinephrine systems that regulate attention also regulate emotional response. When those systems are dysregulated, emotions aren't dampened the way they are in neurotypical brains. Joy can be euphoric, excitement can be overwhelming, frustration can spike into fury in seconds, sadness can be consuming. In autism, emotional intensity is often compounded by the difficulty of processing emotions in real time. Alexithymia, the difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotional states, affects a significant proportion of autistic people. You might feel something intensely without having the internal language to name it. The emotion is present and powerful. The understanding of what it is arrives later. For AuDHD, emotional intensity from both systems compounds. Rapid emotional escalation from ADHD, difficulty identifying and processing emotions from autism, and frequently, because of masking, a lifetime of having been told that your emotional responses are too much, too intense, too dramatic, when in reality your nervous system was simply working at a different scale all along. Trait 10, routine, predictability, and transition difficulty. The need for routine and predictability in autism is often framed as rigidity. It isn't, it's regulation. When the world is unpredictable, the autistic nervous system has to work overtime to process and adapt. Routine reduces that cognitive load. Knowing what to expect, when, and in what order frees up processing resources for everything else. When routine is disrupted, especially without warning, it doesn't just cause inconvenience, it can cause genuine distress because the regulatory system that routine was supporting suddenly has nothing to hold on to. ADHD has a complex relationship with routine. On one hand, routine can help manage executive function challenges, removing the need to make decisions repeatedly. On the other hand, the ADHD brain craves novelty, and rigid routine can become unstimulating and therefore hard to maintain. AuDHD sits in a specific tension here. The autistic system needs routine for regulation. The ADHD system resists routine out of boredom. The result is often a person who builds routines, finds them regulating, but also disrupts them, not out of choice, but because the ADHD system has moved on, then struggles with the disruption they themselves created. Trait 11, sleep difficulties. Sleep problems are so common in both autism and ADHD that they're almost considered part of the profile rather than a separate symptom. In ADHD, sleep onset is a particular challenge. The brain that spent all day struggling to focus often becomes most active exactly when the person is trying to sleep. Thoughts race, ideas arrive. The body is finally still, but the mind accelerates. Many people with ADHD describe being night owls, not by preference but by neurology. Their circadian rhythm genuinely runs later, and their brain won't quiet on demand. In autism, Sleep difficulties are linked to several factors: sensory sensitivities that make the sleep environment difficult to regulate, anxiety that activates at night when external stimulation reduces and internal processing increases, and lower melatonin production, which research has consistently found to be altered in autistic people. For AuDHD, both sets of sleep challenges combine: a brain that won't quiet, a nervous system that's still processing the day's sensory input, and a circadian rhythm that runs late. Chronic sleep deprivation then worsens every other trait. Executive function, emotional regulation, sensory sensitivity, and cognitive flexibility all degrade significantly with insufficient sleep, creating a cycle that's difficult to interrupt without understanding the neurology driving it. Trait 12: the twice exceptional experience. Strength and struggle, coexisting. The final trait isn't a deficit, it's a reality. Both autism and ADHD are associated with what researchers call twice exceptional profiles, cognitive profiles where significant challenges and significant strengths coexist in the same brain, often as two sides of the same neurological coin. The same monotropic processing that makes certain tasks excruciating can produce extraordinary depth of expertise in areas of genuine interest. The same sensory sensitivity that makes busy environments overwhelming can produce remarkable attention to detail, aesthetic sensitivity, and pattern recognition. The same brain that loses track of time has the capacity for hyperfocus that neurotypical people can't always access. The same divergent thinking that makes linear tasks difficult generates creative connections that linear thinkers miss entirely. This doesn't mean the challenges aren't real. They are, profoundly, and the framing of neurodivergence as purely a gift does a disservice to the genuine difficulty of navigating a world designed for a different kind of brain. But understanding that the strengths and the struggles share the same neurological root, that they're not separate things happening to you, but two expressions of the same underlying architecture, changes how you relate to both. You are not a neurotypical person with deficits. You are a different kind of mind with a different operating system in a world that was built for a different default. The goal isn't to become neurotypical. It's to understand your own system well enough to work with it instead of against it. If this video described your experience, if you recognized yourself in more of these traits than you expected, that recognition is worth something, not as a diagnosis, but as information, as a starting point for understanding yourself more accurately than you may have been able to before. Talk to a professional if you want formal assessment, but don't dismiss what you've just recognized. The people who go their whole lives without understanding why their brain works differently don't suffer less. They just suffer without a map. Now you have one. Drop a comment below with which trait resonated most. And if this video describes someone you love, share it with them. Sometimes the right words at the right moment change everything. If you found this helpful, please consider liking and subscribing so we can continue learning and growing together.